The Wisconsin legislature is now set. 6 new state senators, all Democrats, and 31 new assembly makers, 23 of them Democrats, were sworn into office today. Republicans still holding an advantage, though, in both houses of the legislature. It's a slimmer majority, though, than previous years, which is leading some lawmakers to hope for more compromise in 2025. This begins with a state budget proposal from Governor Tony Evers. The main focus is the governor's revival of a plan to give voters the power to enact laws without the approval of the legislature. In the First Alert Update, Drew Best looks into the plan and how Republican leaders are responding.
Under current regulations, Wisconsin voters cannot propose new state laws through referendums at the ballot box. Governor Evers wants to change that.
They should give Wisconsinites the same opportunity that 26 other states have.
At Friday's press conference embargoed until Monday, Governor Evers says voters should be allowed to petition for items to be added to state ballots, citing ideas like legalizing marijuana or codifying abortion access as examples. Governor Evers unveiling a budget proposal that will require a Republican-led legislature to take up whether or not Wisconsinites can propose new state laws on their ballots. Republican Assembly Speaker Robin Vos rejecting the idea, telling the Associated Press, quote, "It appears that Tony Evers' single agenda item for the next session is to take power away from the elected members of the legislature. If that's his focus, it's going to make it awfully hard to find consensus," end quote. The people of Wisconsin also offering split opinions.
It's very important to have the vote on the ballot so that we can better let our electives know how we feel and where we stand and what our beliefs are.
I think that too much democracy is sometimes a little bit overwhelming at the ballot when there's so many people that go to the ballot without ever reading actually what they're going to be doing.
If the Joint Finance Committee includes Evers' proposal in the budget, the amendment will then need to be passed in 2 consecutive sessions before appearing on Wisconsinites' ballots for a vote.
I'm hopeful that as we ring in a new year in Wisconsin after fair maps, we will see a legislature that's more collaborative.
Despite the governor's proposals, Democrats and Republicans will have to battle out how to spend the state's $4 billion surplus this budget session. I'm Drew Best for Action 2 News.